welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad to have you here. Today we're going to talk about refugees, and it's because that I think it's really important that we as human beings take care of each other, no matter where we're from, no matter where we live, no matter our skin color, and so on. And I feel it's a world not imbalanced, and I really want to try to understand how we can make the world to a better place. And I am really lucky to be sitting here making a podcast about this topic and not being one of the millions of people who are running away from something which is kind of trying to kill them, or from like horrible places of many different horrible reasons. So as I sit here in Norway and doing this podcast and trying to align my work with how we can make the world a better place, I want to dig deep into different topics. And the topic of refugees is one that I really want to try to understand in the best way possible, because it's just so weird how we human beings can live at the same time but live so different lives. And when we see that other human beings are not being treated as good as we are, or now I'm talking from my own view at least, that we don't have better systems in place to really take care of each other. And I think the politics around refugees and so on is one of those things. So today we're going to talk with Hakan, and Hakan is an expert in this topic. And I'm very glad that Hakan took time to talk with me. So who is Hakan? Hakan is a professor, and his full name is, his name is Hakan G. Sicakkan, and Professor Sicakkan operates at the intersection of normative political theory. Professor Sicakkan operates at the intersection of normative political theory, comparative politics, political sociology, and international politics. His areas of specialization include human rights, asylum policies, migration policies, models of citizenship and citizenship policies, European Union politics, European integration, and the European public sphere. Sicakkan is an expert on the EU's and member states' laws, institutions, and policies regarding the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. He has contributed to the international literature on the rights of refugees and asylum seekers with a specific focus on, amongst other things, the role of the European Union in the protection of refugees and asylum seekers, and how asylum laws, institutions should be organized to achieve a just political asylum system. Again, thank you so much, Hakan, for taking the time to talk with me. Everyone, this is the conversation between me and Hakan G. Sicakkan. Okay, wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today, Hakan, or for letting me into your office to record this conversation. I think to maybe start easy for our listeners and for the people who are watching, how would you like what is a refugee, and what types of refugees are there?
Well, there is a legal definition of refugee based on an international convention. In 1951, 167 United Nations member states came together and signed the Geneva Convention. That convention defines the notion of refugee and a refugee's rights and the state's obligation to protect refugees. So all the signatory states are actually committed and obliged to protect refugees if a person is evaluated as a refugee through a legal administrative process. But apart from that, this definition is not uncontested, of course.
What does that mean?
This means that there are groups that want to narrow down the definition of a refugee, and there are groups that want to expand it. There are both political groups on both sides, and there are also academicians and politicians on both sides. So although we have this legal definition now, which is signed and accepted by everybody, the UNHCR is very keen on protecting it, because there are attacks from both sides.
Understand.
And if you want me to go to the content of this definition, a refugee is defined as a person who fears being persecuted or who is being persecuted because of the reasons of his or her racial, religious, political beliefs and belongings, in addition to being, for example, the member of a social group. This can be a class, this can be a sexual orientation. Now it has been expanded to include sexual orientation as well. So the refugee definition is actually quite narrow, the narrowest definition that we have had throughout the history.
Oh, so it's been like
it
smaller,
has been
narrowed
down.
Narrowed down, yeah.
I can go into the reasons why it has been narrowed down maybe later if you want, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll maybe get to that. Yeah. But then also like, does that also include like climate change refugees, or is that why you have to say climate change refugees, kind of to include them as refugees?
That's correct.
As well?
The Geneva Convention does not include climate refugees. It includes only political refugees in the sense that I just mentioned,
exactly.
People who are persecuted in their countries of origin.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And preparing for this conversation, I was watching like a lot of documentaries and so on, and reading about would you say it's like a refugee crisis, or like do you use that word in your work, or?
It is, in my opinion, not a refugee crisis, but a humanitarian crisis, a refugee protection crisis that is caused by countries that are supposed to protect refugees.
Yeah.
Of course, this has also something to do with the numbers of refugees who are coming. But on the other hand, there's always more space for protecting more refugees. And statistics show that states are less and less willing to protect refugees, and they are doing less and less, despite the fact that they are obliged by a refugee convention that they have signed.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Wow. Regarding all of that, I really appreciate like the work you do. But for the ones who are listening, like, what are some of the most important things that you personally think that you're working on right now?
Okay, of course, this refugee research that I'm doing, together with approximately 50 colleagues in 12 universities, I think spread over 9 countries in the world. It is very important because it's about the life and death of people. I mean, we want to produce more information and knowledge about how to improve their conditions. We are not activists. We are not politicians. We are not doing politics or political activities. But with the knowledge that we produce, we hope to make politicians and decision makers, both at the EU level and at the state level, understand that it is possible to protect more refugees without necessarily having to risk any financial or political risks.
Because that are like the main arguments against like actually helping refugees?
No, this is not the main argument. At least this is not our main argument, but the main argument by governments has been that they are bound by a democratic system that they are very much dependent on. They are dependent on the votes of their citizens. They are dependent on public support. They are dependent on media support. and they have to win elections to survive. That's the main argument coming from the politicians. But on the other hand, we have surveyed 26 countries. Most of them are European countries and some non-European countries as well. The non-European countries that we surveyed include the USA, for example, the largest, the most powerful state in the world as of now, and Mexico, one of the countries that is now hosting a lot of refugees. It is one of the countries that is protecting the rich north against refugees by holding refugees in Mexico. And Turkey, we have, for example, they're also holding the Syrian refugees and Afghans and others from traveling further to Europe. And also all these North African states that have bilateral agreements with the European Union, and also bilateral agreements with some individual European states. All these agreements are about actually holding the refugee streams back, holding the refugees from arriving to the rich north. So we have represented all these different kinds of states in our survey. What we find is that more than 65% of the citizens do actually want to protect more refugees. They are very much in favor of more international collaboration to protect refugees. And like 23% are saying that all available means should be used to protect refugees. This means that we are willing to sacrifice much more. And another 22% says we very much agree to using as many available means as possible to protect refugees. And some say they are partly. Only like 14% say that they are not so much in favor of using so much resources to protect refugees. So when you look at what citizens think, so I think the politicians and government's argument is actually not valid.
Exactly. Yeah.
They would get a lot of support if they went for more in the direction. If they went more in the direction of international collaboration and more protection of refugees.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. So, do you then like publish that research so that people can use it, or like how do the politicians get that information?
We have several ways of doing this. First of all, we have some publications. We are making some international publications in very high quality, high impact international journals. So if your work is accepted by one of those journals, it means that it is very high quality and it is not possible to pose so many questions to its methodology or research and etc.
Exactly.
So we have several now articles that are accepted in this way. And our strategy, the communication plan that we made in the project is that we first produce results, and based on these results, we produce policy briefs. These are then shorter versions that are especially targeting policymakers and using the language that they are used to. We are getting rid of the scientific language and using the politicians' language, so that these are then I would prefer one-sheet policy briefs that a politician can use when taking the elevator from the first to the fifth floor. But this is not possible because the issue is very complicated. The policymakers are then getting 4 or 5 pages of documents on each of the findings that we have.
Yeah.
And hopefully they are reading this.
Hope so.
Yeah.
You mentioned some like numbers and some data and so on. Do you have any other like statistic or numbers?
We have many. We have lots of numbers, but these are very technical numbers. I would actually prefer to tell the results without many numbers here, because numbers will complicate things and it will might create confusion.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, but I can give you the basic numbers of refugees from the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This is an organ that is responsible for implementing and coordinating actions in connection with international refugee protection. It is the international guardian of the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the last number of the refugees, total number of the displaced persons in the world is reported by the UNHCR as 89.3 million people. And this is the number that they have by the end of 2021. And this is steadily increasing. When we started the project 3 years ago, it was like 82.5 million. And now it's 85.5 million, 5 million, and it's now 89. And you asked about climate refugees. The climate refugees, we have an annual average of new climate refugees, 21.5 millions of them every year.
Now?
Yes, we are having 21.5 million climate refugees in average every year. This is the number that comes from the UNHCR as well. Then a climate refugee is defined as a person who is forced to leave his or her home because of natural disasters, floods, fires that are caused by natural reasons, global warming, and etc. And this is expected to increase as well.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I said that climate refugees are not included in the definition of a political refugee that is used by the Geneva Convention today.
Yeah.
This is a hard reality. It is there, and climate refugees are not included. Only political refugees. It addresses only the political refugees. But there are also actions by non-state organizations, idealist organizations, that are trying to include climate refugees into the definition of the Geneva Convention definition of the refugee. The UNHCR and the international community, the international community means the states here. When I say international society, it means both the states and international organizations and civil society organizations.
Okay.
So these are two ideological ways of referring to the world society. If you see the world as an ensemble of states and nations, it's the international community. The UNHCR has to use that word because states want so. And liberal organizations, non-state organizations say the international society, including themselves as both decision makers and policy lobbyists and policy makers as well. So the international society is trying to include climate refugees into the definition of the refugee, but the UNHCR and the states have been objecting to this because as the situation is now, even this narrow definition of refugee is not working so well. The states are not assuming their responsibilities that are written in the international law, especially the global north is not taking the responsibility that it should be taking. And if we expand this refugee category, it will be even more difficult to make them help the political refugees. So now the international society, including the UNHCR, want to... it has been mentioned that a new convention on climate refugees might be a better way to go. But this discussion is still ongoing, and we don't know how it will end. But on the other hand, we know that, for example, at least 2 countries in Europe have used the Geneva Convention to give asylum status to some climate refugees. One of them is Sweden. The other one, I don't remember now. It might be Switzerland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Damn. And do you know, by the way, if you said like now it's 89.3?
89.3 million refugees.
Does that include 20 something?
No, it doesn't.
No, okay.
No.
Yeah.
This is only the refugees that are defined in terms of the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
Plus the 21, I don't know the total amount. The 21.5 is the number that is coming annually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So at least over 100 million then.
Probably.
Yeah, probably. Oh, wow. Can I ask, like, why did you choose to work with this?
Well, I can't say that I chose it out of ideological reasons, but on the other hand, my political and ideological orientation was not a hinder for doing this research. I know that some dislike focusing on refugees, but I don't do that. The main thing that I'm trying to do is actually to understand the interplays between the political boundaries and what's happening inside democracy and the political boundaries. I did some refugee and migration research as well, but I'm not looking at actually refugees and migrants themselves. I'm looking at the policies. And the richer a state, a country is, and the more equal welfare system, the less refugee protection is given by that country. So it means that also more democracy, more welfare sharing within the country may lead to stricter rules concerning foreigners' entry into the country. So this is just an example. There are other things. For example, I looked at citizenship as well. Citizenship laws, how they are defined, and there's a clear relationship between the state types and nation types that are the ingredients of our identities and belongings today. These historical processes have given us some collective identities, and some types of identities do not allow us to think in terms of inclusive policies, and some do. So the relationship between the boundaries and what happens inside inclusive and integration processes inside the states is my general question. And I'm using the refugee policies, migration policies, citizenship policies, etc., as cases to look at that relationship. These are just themes. Yeah. But of course, as a human being, I'm also concerned about the lives of others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understand. And But the last things you mentioned, can I ask, like, how is Norway doing compared to other countries, since we're really democratic and good welfare? And
Well, not as good as we should be doing. We are rich and we can do more. Especially asylum procedures have become very strict and quite strict. And we know that some people who might be qualified for international protection in Norway are not recognized as refugees. But we can come back to this in more general ways if you want. These are now, especially after the 22nd of July, these terror bombings in Oslo, where 77 people died. Instead of developing a more humanitarian approach to others, the consensus developed in the opposite direction. As a scientist, we can easily read that, and we can measure it by looking at the discourses in media and social media, and by looking at the surveys that are survey data that are collected by the state itself. So we could do better, and one of the reasons why we are not doing is the consensus that I mentioned now. And out of that consensus, we have been restrictive. Look at, for example, at least the new migration policy proposal that the Labour Party, the Norwegian Labour Party, Arbeiderpartiet, had before the last election. It's actually quite strict, much stricter than what they had before. And it came closer to the program of the Progress Party. And there are very few parties now that do not agree with this strict politic. Of course, there are many other concerns. This is not happening because of racism. This is happening because of concern for votes. And as I said, they do not have to be concerned about this, actually. Yeah. And this is also happening because of the bad examples in our neighbor countries like Denmark, for example. The Danish political system and discourses have really been carried to the extreme during the last 10 years, and society is almost not recognizable. With this, I don't mean that, of course, a country has the right to decide about its own immigration policies, and a bit more restricted. All countries are a bit more restricted when it comes to the international protection of refugees because they have signed the convention. But even if the case were so, we have some international human rights agreements, conventions, and etc. that need to be followed. And Denmark is actually violating some of these by law and by practice, immigration policy practice. So when, if I were a social democrat, I'm saying this in order not to reveal what I am. If I were a social democrat, I would get panic when I looked at what happened in Denmark. The whole political system, almost the whole political system, is captured by almost radical right-wingers. even though they are not there
Mm.
to that extent, their ideas have captured the political system. And after the last elections, I was hoping that this would change a little bit. No, it didn't. The extremists or radicals or nationalists, these are different categories, I know, but it's also an alliance between them. Even though they are not sitting in the power chairs, their ideas are there. So I understand that the Labour Party got panicked and wanted to respond to that before the problem came and created this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, like a general topic of this like podcast and so on is also like trying to figure out like how we can do the most good. So I'm also just wondering, like with everything you do, like do you have any tips of like if somebody's going to try to figure out how they can best improve the world? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Of course, but that's a big question.
I know.
And any answer that is given to that is necessarily wrong or incomplete. So in this sense, my answer will naturally not be perfect. It's just going to be a wishful thinking. On the other hand, we need to have visions. Without visions, we cannot progress. So in this sense, I have my own visions, which I know overlaps with many other people's visions. If we want to go with refugees, also in connection with this question, there are at least a few things that we can do. One of them is what we found in our discourse analysis in this project is that the main reason for why some people think negatively about refugees is that the two categories of refugee and migrant are collapsed in discourse or conflated, better word. When you say a refugee in the public, many people understand migrant, but this is not correct. A refugee is forced to leave his or her country, whereas a migrant has some calculations, economic calculations, cultural calculations, whatever, when he or she moves to another country. One of our colleagues, Professor Simon Usherwood, for example, who's working at the Open University and doing part of our research about the civil society organizations' attitudes to refugees, together with the Surrey University, so two British universities that are partners here, Surrey and Open University. They found that, this is just one of the examples, the civil society organizations who have a narrower understanding of refugee as not migrant, as not necessarily a small part of a bigger humanitarian work. So two opposites. Migrant, an understanding of a refugee as a migrant on the one hand, and an understanding of a refugee as a bigger task of humanitarian improvement or development. Both of these have smaller action scope concerning help to refugees. That is, they don't work so much with refugees. But those that perceive refugees as a distinct category, distinct group of people who need protection, then they have a large repertoire of action for helping those people. So in that sense, it is important to make people, the citizens, for example, understand the refugee category as something distinct from regular migrants. And this will help.
Okay.
And the second thing is, of course, state policies. State policies also conflate these two categories. For example, the latest Migration and Asylum Pact that has been proposed, and now some parts of it are in force by the European Union, completely conflates these two categories. Asylum and migration are dealt with in one document, and when you look the entire document as a whole, you see that refugees' rights are diluted within all this security discourse, border management discourse, also, etc. And refugees are supposed to be then treated like other migrants when they arrive, although there are some protection clauses in the Migration and Asylum Pact. The whole document might lead to a dilution of the category of the refugee because it is together with migrants. And the European Union is very much aware of this, because that document actually was developed in order to reduce the number of the asylum seekers to the European Union. It is a strategic document, but on the other hand, by producing such a legal document that conflates the two categories, the European Union is also affecting the opinions of the public as well, and strengthening a conception of refugee as just another migrant. So in that sense, one thing that can be done, never make laws that treat refugees and migrants as the same group. And when you speak to the public, and in the public as a politician, as a leader, make it very clear what you're talking about, migration or international protection. This is very important. And another thing that can be done is the organization of the asylum procedures. We are recently finishing a new article on that. And there are some ways of organizing asylum procedures that lead to more fair outcomes for the rights of the refugees. For example, some countries have centralized their decision-making systems. That is, the Ministry of Justice or an agency that is connected to it is doing almost everything related with the procedure. This is very centralized. Everything is done and decided by them. And some countries, like, for example, the United Kingdom, you have many other organizations that are even taking part in decision-making. In Denmark, for example, you still have an international organization. They can put veto in asylum decisions, but I don't think it's used so often now. In the United Kingdom, non-state organizations, refugee aid organizations, they are institutionally included in decision-making, in asylum boards, in appeal boards, etc., which makes the outcomes fairer, which decreases the influence of politics against the rule of law. Another article that we found actually, that we wrote actually, and it is now accepted by a very high impact journal, the European Union Politics Journal. We found that if you have a strong administration, very strong and competent administration around asylum decision making, politics will not be able to affect your decisions. Politics can affect asylum decision making in both ways. If you have a government that is very fond of refugees, then if your administration is not competent or strong enough, they will start granting more refugee statuses than they are supposed to. So more liberal interpretation and use of the law. But on the other hand, what more often happens is that if you have a restrictive government, some people who are supposed to have refugee status don't get it because the asylum decision makers or case workers are listening to the politicians more than looking at the Geneva Refugee Convention's definition of a refugee. So in this sense, you can organize your asylum administration more strongly by using a pluralistic perspective, which includes other organizations than states themselves, both in decision making and service provision during the asylum recognition process. These are the two things that we have now. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Nice. Thank you. Okay. So some short questions.
Yes.
I'm wondering if like, let's say, like, hypothetically, that we would have like a team ready to make a documentary about something. Are there something that you think we need a documentary on, which it's not already been made?
I think it would be a documentary that is going in depth in institutions like UDI in Norway. This is the Directorate of Immigration that is making asylum decisions, and UNE, the Asylum Appeals Board in Norway, and also corresponding organizations in several other countries, and follow how decisions are made, because it is very important to have transparency there. And this is an area that we don't have transparency. There have been some ethnographic research in some countries, and the findings are really, really interesting. And a documentary would be a good way of disseminating this to the public as well.
And regarding like documentaries and like things people can watch, do you have any like book recommendations or documentaries or anything, like, or like resources? It could be like maybe websites as well, like if people want to like learn more about like this topic. And yeah.
Of course, I know a very good web page about this. It's protect.uib.no. This is the web page of the project that I'm leading. And the project is being conducted by 12 universities in Europe and Canada and South Africa. And we have policy briefs there, publications, and blogs that are more accessible for the general public, plus many short and long videos, actually, for those who prefer to listen rather than read. So we are using almost all sorts of communication means in the project. And I would first of all recommend this one. It is because it's we are now one of the latest projects with the latest, most updated knowledge about this, especially after the Global Refugee Compact was started being implemented by the UNHCR and its member states. The Global Refugee Compact is trying to improve the international refugee protection system by inserting a global or international collaboration element into it. The 1951 Refugee Convention did not have it. The Global Refugee Compact is trying to insert it into the system, but it's not binding yet. And I don't think it will be binding in the foreseeable future either. But if your listeners want to see the latest developments in international refugee protection, it's us.
Amazing. Yeah. And yeah, we're also going to leave all of the links of your webpage and everything in the description. So for the ones listening or watching, you can find it there. Yeah. Do you have any other points or some last thoughts?
Well, I have many things to say, but I will leave it with this now. And my other points are all written in the resources that I mentioned, and they are available. Thank you very much for coming here and visiting us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you again, Hakan, for taking the time to talk with me. I learned a lot and I'm still learning. And I hope that people who listened or watched this episode did as well. And for everybody listening in or watching this, please check out the description, as I posted a lot of resources about this specific topic. And if you have any feedback, please let me know. I'm always happy to get feedback, to improve and to increase the sense making, or to better the sense making that I am doing and that we as human beings together are doing. And I guess that's it. So thank you again so much for being here, Hakan, and to the ones who listened and watched this episode. And I hope to see you in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.